This is the story of the most famous Madeira wine producer. Blandy's Madeira has been a family-owned company for 7 generations and for over 200 years. The Blandys have passionately dedicated themselves to the tradition, art and craft of the famous Madeira wine. Today, the company is led by 7th generation member Chris Blandy. In 1811, John Blandy, a young Englishman originally from Dorset, but now living on the island of Madeira, started to set the foundation for the family and the island itself with the production of the most famous and unique wine in the world, Madeira wine. In Dorset, a previously prosperous farming family was struggling after the death of Charles Blandy in 1803. That may have propelled John Blandy, the oldest son, aged 24, to set sail in 1807 and seek fortune in Madeira, a Portuguese island off the coast of Morocco, bearing in his suitcase an introduction letter to Newton, Gordon and Murdoch, for whom he worked for until returning to England to get married. John quickly fell in love with the beauty of the island. In 1811, after returning to the island from England, John Blandy started his own wine company with brothers Thomas and George. The company soon started exporting wine to the 4 corners of the world and to places as far as Russia, Northern Europe, the Antilles, and North America. In order to broaden their activities, they also began importing various products from other origins.
The 1811 is a wine that really, in my opinion, identifies what the family were back in the early 19th century and very much what we are today. It's a wine that has a huge amount of complexity, intensity, and the fact that we're still able to drink a wine going back to 1811, I think it's important and really kind of highlights what's great and good about Madeira wine.
Always on the run, John Blandy traveled to many countries, including his homeland, but always returned to Madeira, where he finally passed away at the age of 72.
John Blandy came out, and he came out before 1811. He came out actually in 1808, I think. He was looking for work. And he went back to marry. And then when he came out to Madeira again, he rented all these lodges which he bought later. And what I find fascinating is that we've had this for over 200 years. Makes it up to monument to our business and to the family.
Charles Blandy, one of John Blandy's 3 children, assumes the company's leadership at the age of 32. Determined and hard-working, he established Blandy's solid foundations. In 1840, Charles Blandy acquired an annex to a Franciscan monastery built in the 17th century and converted it into a wine cellar, which until today is the House of Blandys, holding barrels and vats of the family's fortified Madeira wine. Being located close to the port of Funchal made the distribution of the wines throughout the world much easier. This building is a dynamic museum. And why? Well, when entering the building, one can feel and experience the responsibility of having an historic wine cellar in the center of Funchal, knowing that at the same time it continues to store and age some of the company's finest wines, which year after year are moved from the higher floors to the lower ones as part of their unique aging process. And it is in these historical cellars, known as the Blandy's Wine Lodge, that not only the wines are still stored and aged, but are also considered as the island's most iconic tourist attraction, with its museum, cellar tours, and wine shop. Visitors are able to have a remarkable, unique, and unforgettable wine experience.
So we've just arrived here at the Blandy's Wine Lodge, which is very much the heart of our operation. It's where we have over 600,000 litres of premium Madeira wine aging.
We found that the wines aged here are different. As we are near ocean level, they evolve much faster. In the initial years, the wine is aged on the third floor. On average, it stays about 5 years on this level before being transferred to the second floor, where they stay for another 5 to 10 years, and then transferred to this floor. When they are about 20 years old, the wines are transferred to the ground floor. This is where the oldest wines are stored and matured, in old wooden barrels. In a guided tour of the wine lodges, we are taken through a fantastic journey of this family-owned company history, as well as the history of Madeira wine, and given the opportunity to taste some of its finest wines, from the youngest to the oldest and rarest. Charles Blandy gave birth to one of the finest wine libraries known to man, which came to be named Blandy Madeiras. His vision and strategy were only recognized in 1879, after his death. And today, if we are still able to find these rare wines of great importance, we owe it to him.
I think one of the big responsibilities that each family member who's involved in the wine business has is actually to ensure that we continue to remain guardians of old Madeira wine in order to pass on to the next generation. I think it's actually quite an interesting challenge, albeit a positive challenge, in which we have to make sure that sales of old Madeira don't overwhelm the existing stock for the future generations. And it's actually one of the reasons that we're lucky enough to be now in the private family cellar and still have wine from 1860, 1860 Soleras, 1811 we've already seen, but also wines like this, 1755 Malvasia, and then of course fantastic old bottles such as this one here, which I think is not a piece of art in its own right. Not really too sure what's in here, but I know I don't really want to be the person to open it. Being in a position to have old wine like this is great, but for me, we're ultimately guardians of these wines. And my objective is to not only pass the company in a better state in which I inherited it, but also to ensure that future generations can be in a position to enjoy these old wines.
The prospects for the Blandy's business was gloomy in the early days. Charles Blandy's death was soon followed by his sons, John Graham. John Burton, the youngest, soon found himself at the helm of the company in dire straits, from which he rapidly bounced back. John Burton was able to overcome the difficult times and returned it as the leading Madeira wine shipper, particularly in the international markets, where the company's stock of rare and old vintages set the path to success. As in any other wine region in the world, Madeira too has its wine cycle, which begins with pruning and ends with the aging of the wines to maturity in barrels, before being bottled many years later. Great relevance is given to viticulture by the family, who over the last 7 generations has been working with more than 600 wine growers. In the later years, the family has invested in securing the future by establishing long-term lease contracts that provide management of key estates, and also invested in new vineyards of its own.
590 kilometers west of Casablanca and 900 kilometers southwest of Lisbon, the archipelago of Madeira is made up of 3 islands, the main one being Madeira, Porto Santo, and the Desertas Islands. Madeira, as you can see behind me, is an extremely rugged coastline, and even though it's subtropical, this northeasterly prevailing wind hits the north coast of Madeira and creates these 7 separate microclimates on the island, also due to the long mountainous region that cuts across the island from the east coast through to the west.
The island's incredible landscapes of Caniçal vineyards, in São Jorge, much higher, Quinta do Bispo or Quinta de Santa Luzia, show that these wines are clearly mountain wines. In the south coast of the island, the climate is subtropical to tropical. Being of volcanic origin, the soils are very rich and clayey, with a predominance of basalt rock, being also very acidic and rich in organic matter. Along the coast and sea cliffs, sedimentary rocks can be found. Blandy has been studying the soils, not only to plant more vineyards in the ideal conditions, but also to better understand and preserve the soils. We are in Quinta de Santa Luzia, an estate which has been acquired by John Blandy and has remained in the family since. The property has an area of approximately 2 hectares of vineyard and is the largest in Funchal. Apart from this 2-hectare estate, we are also investing in another one in the north of the island, Quinta do Bispo, with an area of approximately 4.5 hectares. In both properties, our focus is on white varietals. At Quinta de Santa Luzia, we have Terrentes, Boal and Verdelho, and at Quinta do Bispo, we have planted Malmsey, Cercial and Verdelho. The Blandy family continues to give great importance to preserving the traditions and guaranteeing that the wines are of high quality, made from traditional grape varieties, aging in the traditional methods, and at the same time have a modern level of production. This combination of old and new has been consistently achieved without prejudice of the wine's quality, assured by a highly qualified team of professionals who oversee the entire process from the vine to wine.
The Verdelho varietal was one of the most widely cultivated varietals here in Madeira, planted just after the discovery in the mid-15th century. Unfortunately, due to phylloxera in 1872, the vineyards were replaced with other varietals. But today we're actually seeing a comeback, and we're here in the region of Raposeira, about 600 meters above sea level, at one of the main Verdelho vineyards on the island, and producing some fantastic grapes. The vines themselves, they need deep, rich soils, slight humidity. But seeing that we're here in the southwesternmost part of the island, we have a lot of sun exposure. The berries themselves are small, compact, and easily recognizable by the fact that they're elongated. Verdelho produces a medium dry Madeira, very aromatic, very fresh, and of course with the classic acidity found in the Madeiran soils.
In 1912, John Ernst Blandy, born 1866 in Durban, South Africa, took over from his father, John Burton. This was a successful time for the family, as the business was at its peak. Any other English family with this same success would have easily gained at the time a noble title in England, but the Blandys preferred to dedicate themselves to the various family businesses. Madeira wine exports increased significantly, especially as a result of the Russian market. But in 1914, due to the beginning of World War I, shippers stopped buying grape must. The family therefore decided to help the producers and started aging large quantities of must at no cost. In 1917, the vines were attacked with mildew due to the lack of sulfur, and a year later, in 1918, they experienced yet another crisis due to the lack of brandy to fortify the wines. John Ernst was not prepared and experienced to run the business, and the company went through a difficult period. John Ernst's son, Graham, joined the family business at a time when his father was tired, disappointed, and deeply affected with the fact that he was not able to deal with the pressures of the demanding business.
So here we are on the south side of Madeira, in a place called Jardim da Serra. Jardim da Serra is located about 700 meters above sea level. And even though Madeira is a subtropical region, there are 7 different microclimates here on the island. And being 700 meters above sea level means that there's a difference of about 7 degrees centigrade compared to the temperatures down at sea level. Up here we have the Cercial varietal, one of the most well-known varietals in the Madeira wine. And it's a grape that's actually grown here almost at ankle level. This is why. This is in order to maximize the heat given off from the soil. Because up here, due to the low temperatures, it actually has a hard time to reach the indicated maturation level. And rarely do we actually find Cercial with potential alcohol levels above 10.5, 11%. The interesting thing about the Cercial varietal is actually it produces extremely large bunches of grapes, very closely packed together, so which makes it prone to rot. But due to the low humidity levels up here, the majority of the grapes that we source from this vineyard are actually of extremely high quality. Another interesting fact about the Cercial grape is that in the mainland Portugal, it's also called esguenha-cow, which literally means a dog strangler. And you can tell that by the very, very high levels of acidity. But it produces a fantastic wine. It's extremely fresh, invigorating, bone dry, high levels of acidity, and it ages to become one of the greatest vintage Madeira wines in our history.
After his father's death, Graham Blandy, born in 1904, took over the business in 1930 at the age of 25. These were troubled times, both socially and economically. And in 1925, the family decided to join the Madeira Wine Association, where various Madeira wine producers were congregated. It was Graham Blandy who later offered a bottle of Madeira wine to Sir Winston Churchill in one of the dinners where the 1792 Blandy Solera was being served. Sir Winston Churchill applauded the wine and said that it needed to be honored. He stood up, put his napkin over his elbow, and poured the wine for each of the guests. Then he sat down and talked of the year 1792, where the wine had been taken on board the Northumberland and sailed south carrying Napoleon Bonaparte to exile in St. Helena. In another occasion, while sitting on the folded-down roof of Graham Blandy's Buick, Churchill acknowledged the cheers of the crowd and said, "I have been greeted by many people in the world for whom I have done something, but never in my whole life been greeted with such enthusiasm by people for whom I have never done anything." Located in the center of Funchal, Blandy's is responsible for the production and marketing of more than half of the Madeira wine within the premium categories. The company currently has various facilities linked to production and runs various estates. The viticulture and winemaking team works closely with growers to ensure the best grapes are delivered to the winery. From March onwards, they constantly oversee the many vineyards and estates from where the company sources its grapes, giving advice and counseling to ensure that during the harvest they deliver fruit in perfect conditions, which are the basis of outstanding wines. Many of the wine growers and estates have been working with the Blandys for several generations, and although there aren't any written contracts, both respect their gentleman's agreement. Upon arrival at the winery, all grapes are carefully checked for sanity, destemmed and destocked prior to being pressed, and undergo fermentation in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks. And once the wines achieve their desired sugar level, neutral alcohol is added to arrest fermentation. The wines are then transferred to aging. From the 17th century, all Madeira wines shipped to the Americas and Far East were loaded in casks onto vessels that crossed the equator and were exposed to high temperatures and humidity. They served a dual purpose, both as ballast for the ship and sustenance for the sailors. When these vessels returned to Europe, connoisseurs appreciated its remarkable qualities acquired during its long maritime journey and started asking for wines which had been sent on a round trip, thus giving birth to the Vinho da Roda. After the 17th century, producers started using the technique of estufagem, where the wines were heated in similar conditions to those experienced on the round trips. The method of estufagem is still used today. Born on the island of Madeira in 1909, John Reeder was the third child of John Ernest. After having served in the Second World War, in 1950 he returned to the island to run the Madeira Wine Company. He ran the company until the age of 65, passing the company management onto his nephew, Adam Blandy. The wines aging in barrel lie quietly in the attics of the lodges, acquiring the unique and distinguishable bouquet. The wines located at the Blandy's wine lodges have particular character, which comes from the exclusive microclimate of these buildings, with its walls made of pebble beach stone, floors recovered from old shipwrecks and old buildings, and the unique combination of natural heat and humidity, which has an unparalleled effect on the wine's concentration and bouquet, as a result of the angel's share.
Os aromas de São Francisco.
But the wooden casks sometimes give in and have small ruptures due to the weight of the wine. It is therefore necessary to repair these barrels where they are located, and that is why the company continues to have 4 coopers on a permanent basis.
Por isso, todos os dias temos 4 tanoeiros.
That is why we still have 4 coopers, due to the stock of more than 2.5 million liters of wooden casks with the container system. Every day, these coopers go through these casks and verify them to avoid any leaks. This is a rule that we apply. As you can see where we are, these are 9,000-liter vats that have been restored by our coopers. They are called liões, lions. That is why we call this warehouse the Lion's Warehouse. Each lion was recovered by one single cooper, and for that reason, each one of these tanks has been named after these coopers: Mestre Silva, Mestre Rogério, Mestre Emanuel, and Mestre José António.
Mestre José António.
Adam Blandy was born on the island of Madeira in 1935. He grew up, graduated, and returned to the island in 1963, where he joined the company with a different, modern, and open-minded spirit. In the beginning, his attitude created some discomfort and lack of confidence. This rapidly changed, and he was soon highly respected. Adam Blandy took over the company when the revolution of the 25th of April and the downfall of the dictatorial government occurred in Portugal. With the political and social changes that soon raged all over, the heritage of the Blandy family was in danger, especially when the nationalization campaigns of the companies started. The Madeira Wine Association was initially an association of the various Madeira wine producers, mainly English or descendant from the English. The Blandy family took over control of the Madeira Wine Company in the 80s and continued to develop each one of the company's individual brands, named after the original families involved in the association. Blandy's Madeira represents more than half of the sales of the Madeira Wine Company. As we can see, we are standing next to a cask containing 1920 Bual. This is the oldest wine we have in a cask and has already been partially bottled. I am trying to hold it there for a few more years. That is, if we are able to hold the wine in the cask. The wine goes through a continuous concentration process and may at times become too concentrated. We therefore transfer it to demijohns, where it can keep on aging at a much slower pace before we decide to bottle it. This is a decision which is taken by the team, containing both myself and my team, but also our commercial team and, of course, our board. The family has the final word. Of course, this happens when we have wines which, over their aging in cask, acquire a fantastic character and taste. I taste every barrel and every wine each year. And when I believe I found a special wine, a pearl that reached its aging peak, I normally present a sample to this team, and we jointly decide whether to bottle it or not, as either a colheita, Portuguese for single harvest, or as vintage, which in Portuguese goes by the name of fresqueira. Richard Blandy, born in London in 1947, became chairman of the board of directors in 1986. These were years of great economic expansion and change on the island. The partnerships signed during this period were key to strengthen the group. And in 1989, the family established a partnership with the Symington family from Oporto, which still stands until today. Under this new partnership, the Symington acquired the majority of the shareholding. They remained majority shareholders until 2011, the year the Blandy family celebrated 200 years of existence in Madeira. Although these changes didn't have a significant impact on the company's strategy and management, they certainly gave it more focus. And today, the company is showing an impressive growth track record. The premature departure of Richard Blandy in 2002 had significant implications on the management of the family interests, and ultimately in the management of the company. His legacy continues, and his extraordinary business vision will forever mark this family-owned company. Michael Blandy joined the company in 1977 and took over the family business in the Canary Islands. In 2001, due to Richard's health issues, Michael took over responsibility of the Madeira Wine Company, where he continued Richard's legacy until 2011, preparing the company for the future. From 2010, Michael Blandy started counting on Adam Blandy's son, Christopher Blandy, to help him.
When John Blandy came out, he started trading in wines, and then and then obviously built up the stock, incredibly successful. And the other thing which I find interesting is the closeness that he was to the markets. What was extraordinary is he actually wrote letters, and they wrote to catch a specific ship. And so he was writing to the United States, or he was writing to his son in the UK, and they were getting replies back within 2 weeks, because they were writing to catch a specific ship which was coming to Madeira. The extraordinary thing is that they were very close to their clients, and they made the point of being terribly close to the clients, and this is evidence in the letters that they wrote.
Madeira wine is more and more the right choice for moments between family and/or friends. It can be served at room temperature or chilled, and is appreciated in most modern and delicious cocktails around the world. Born in 1979 and graduated in the US, Christopher Blandy spent some time working with the Symingtons in Oporto. In 2010, he joined Blandy's Madeira, and in 2011, the year in which the family commemorated 200 years in Madeira, Chris became the company CEO. Madeira wines have unique characteristics that allow them to pair with different types of food, enhancing its elegance. Every day, from the market in Funchal, Michelin-starred chef Benoit Sinthen chooses the best local produce for his creations and inspires himself in its colors, smells, and taste. Francisco Albuquerque, winemaker at Blandy's, suggests the best Madeira wine pairing for each dish, presenting new forms of consumption for this unique wine.
A ideia aqui é fazer chutney.
The idea here is to do a chutney with our local apples, and then there is the orange where I left the peel. It combines well with the homemade foie gras marinated in a verdejo. Over the top, a little salt, which makes the link between the chutney and the creamy foie, with a little ginger to help bring out the citrus. And the apple goes well with the chutney.
Em compota, em chutney. Tem que ter elementos.
It must be savory. I think of the verdejo, but a 10-year-old. I think it would be a good combination.
A combinação é bastante feliz.
Today, since its foundation, the Blandy's family-owned business is the market leader in the Madeira wine production and the biggest producer and exporter of high-quality Madeira wine. Today, as from the start, Blandy's continues to be a family-owned business and the biggest producer and exporter of premium Madeira wine. Its leadership in innovation, winemaking, sales and marketing resulted in its international recognition. And year after year, the company receives international trophies and awards from the most knowledgeable experts and competitions around the world. The company's commitment to excellence in production, with the help of a professional and highly motivated, qualified, and experienced team, has yielded year after year consecutive quality certifications and awards.
Cheers.